It's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is reside. Let's take a moment and look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way the verb reside gets used is to mean to have one's permanent home in a particular place or location. Sometimes you might see this word used in a questionnaire asking, where do you reside? Right? And they might be asking in that question for a city, a state, or even a country. A second way the verb reside gets used is to mean to be situated in a particular place. So sometimes people will talk about storing or keeping something in a particular location, and they say, like, the object resides in. They're going to describe that permanent place. A third way the verb reside gets used is frequently used with powers or rights. And when we're using this verb with those ideas of a power and something you can do or you have the authority to do, same idea with rights there, we're talking about them belonging to a particular person, a particular body, like a legislature, a judiciary, an executive office, or a particular group. A fourth way you might hear reside used is to mean to be present or inherent in something. So really it means that something exists in something else. You should know that the verb reside is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, you're going to drop the E because we have a vowel consonant E ending before you add the suffix, before adding the ing. That forms residing. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by just adding D since this verb already ends in an E. Now our base verb, reside, ends in a D sound, a voiced sound. This means when we add the past tense ending, we're going to make an id sound, and we're going to add an extra syllable to the verb. So the past tense and the participle forms should sound like this: resided, resided. Right? I hope you can hear that extra did in the last syllable now. Now, though, let's move on and talk about some phrasal verbs you might encounter. You might encounter reside in. Okay? And this can have a couple different meanings. One goes back to that original definition where we're talking about living in some particular place and really making that someone's long-term home. Right? So we're not going to use reside in if we spend a few days at a hotel on a business trip or a vacation, but we're talking about kind of permanently making something our home, or making it our home for a longer period of time. An example of this might be, they've been residing in that remote cabin for 20 years, right? So they have made this particular small, very simple building their home. A second way to use reside in goes back to that fourth definition of the verb. So to be an inherent trait or property of someone or something. Let's take a look at an example of this. The power to make a positive impact on others resides in all of us. Okay? So the sentence is saying we all have the ability within ourselves, right, to do things that will have a positive effect on other people. That's a second way to use reside in. Another phrasal verb you might encounter is to reside with. This can have a couple different meanings. One would be to go back to that first definition of living here with someone in sort of the same area. This could be same apartment, same home, sort of the same general area. And again, the purpose or the intent here is for a long-term basis. An example of this: she has resided with her daughter since she fell and broke her hip. Right? So maybe we're talking about a parent here who's had some unfortunate medical difficulties and is now living with her daughter for a long-term basis, maybe for the rest of her life. We don't know exactly, but it could extend for that long. A second way to use reside with is to mean to have certain rights or powers belong to a particular person or group. I think that was our third definition there. An example of this: the ability to purchase new furniture or supplies resides with the office manager. Okay, so what we're saying is only the office manager has this power, right? It belongs to him or her. Okay. Now let's move on and do a little more verb tense practice. Today we'll practice the past progressive and the simple future. Let's start with the past progressive. Some teachers, textbooks, and other YouTube videos call this the past continuous, and that's just fine. Past progressive, past continuous mean the exact same thing. We're talking about describing an action that was ongoing or that was continuing in a particular point in the past. The reason I like saying past progressive is that two P's can help you remember that you're going to need two parts to make your verb. So for our verb, we're going to use a past form of be. And this means that we need to pay attention to our subject. If our subject is I, he, she, or it, we'll use was, that's the first part, and then the second part is going to be the ing form of the verb. Now, if your subject is you, we, or they, you're going to use were, W-E-R-E, and then the ing form of the verb. Let's take a look at an example. He was residing at the ABC nursing home when he passed away at age 95. Okay. I thought this would be a nice example to show us what happens frequently with the past progressive. So it's pretty common to see two verbs in sentences with the past progressive. One is past progressive, then the second verb many times is going to be in the simple past tense. That's our interrupting action. So we have one action that's continuing or ongoing, and it gets interrupted by a second action. So here, was residing is in the past progressive, and then we have kind of a sad verb there of passed away, right? That's in the simple past tense. Now let's look at making a negative past progressive sentence. Again, we have to pay attention to our subject. If our subject is I, he, she, or it, I'm going to use was, not, and then the ing form the verb. You might also hear wasn't, and then the ing form. Now, if the subject is you, we, or they, we'll use were not, and then the ing form of the verb, or weren't, and then the ing form. Let's take a look at a negative example. The couple wasn't residing in the state when the matter was heard in court. Okay? So we're just describing they were not living in this particular state or territory. In case you don't live in the United States. Now, let's take a look at yes or no questions. To do this in the past progressive, we start with our past form of be. So, was or were. Depends on what our subject is. We've got to make that past form of be match our subject, which comes next. And then you're going to see the ing form of the verb. Here's another example. Were bats residing in the attic before we moved? Okay, so here, right, we're asking about that continuous or ongoing action, right? And sometimes you will hear this used with animals or particularly pests, things you don't want living in the same place or the same house as you might be. But now let's move on and talk a little bit about the simple future. Today we're going to make sentences with be going to. This is most commonly used as people discuss their plans, what they intend to do in the future. You might occasionally hear it used with promises or predictions, but it's a little less common. When we make sentences in the simple future using be going to, we're going to have to pay attention to our subject. Okay? And the reason for that is our be verb is going to change based on what the subject is. We'll be using present form of be here. So if my subject is I, my pattern is am going to and the base verb. If my subject is you, we, or they, I'm going to use are, A-R-E, going to, and the base verb. And finally, if my subject is he, she, or it, I'll use is going to, and the base verb. An example of this. This book is going to reside in my top 10 for the year. I saw an avid reader, someone who reads a lot of books. They were so excited to share the latest one they had read and said, oh, I'm making a place, essentially. This book is going to be situated or placed in my top 10 of 2023. Now let's look at negative simple future sentences. To do this, again, I start with my subject. I use the form of be that matches am, is, or are. Then I use not, going to, and the base verb. Here's another example. These bugs aren't going to reside in my house. Right? Someone else might be saying, oh, no. We're going to take measures. We're going to do things to get rid of them. And finally, to do a yes or no question in the simple future, we start with our form of be, the form that matches our subject. That subject comes next. And then we use going to and the base verb. So my last example here says, is the data going to reside in our state facilities? This is a question that comes up quite frequently now. We have so many tech companies and there has to be places for this data to be stored or for it to reside and live. And so that's a question some people have. Some are concerned about data being moved outside of the United States or their home countries, as it may be. But now let's move on and talk about some words that are related to our verb reside. The first word we're going to talk about today is the noun residence. This word can have a couple different meanings. It might refer to the place where someone lives. An example of this, someone might kind of point to an area and say, this is a private residence, right? This is not open to the public. It's not a business, right? This is private and where someone lives. The noun residence, though, can also be used to refer to the fact of living in a particular place or location. An example of this might be, Iowa is their main residence, right? So this is describing kind of, this is where they call home, this is where they spend most of their time, where they live. You could insert any sort of state or country to make a sentence to describe that fact of living in a particular place. Another related word you might encounter is the noun resident. This can have a few different meanings. One would be to describe a person who lives in sort of a permanent or a long-term basis. An example of this might be, the apartment complex has about 100 residents. Saying 100 people live here. Okay. A second way to use the noun resident is very much connected to people working their way to becoming doctors. So this is someone who has graduated from a medical program, but now they're getting very specialized or focused practice. Generally, it's in a hospital setting where they continue to kind of learn and see how to be a doctor. So an example of this might be, the exam was conducted by the resident. Okay? Sometimes you might hear this even said medical resident to be a little clearer. Another related word is the adjective form resident. Okay? This can have a couple different meanings. We might be describing someone who has quarters on the premises or on the area where they work. An example of this, the farm employs many resident workers. So this suggests there are special living places, maybe apartment complexes, something on or connected to the farm, and someone's going to work and live there. They're not going to commute to the particular farm. A second way the adjective resident gets used is to describe something that is attached to and working very regularly for a particular company or institution. An example of how you might hear this used: she's our resident expert. Right? So I know I've heard this a lot as I interact with people in different industries and have different specialties. But it's really talking about, like, this is someone we use regularly for their knowledge in this particular area. One last word for us today, and it's the noun residency. This noun can have a couple different meanings. We're going to talk about 3 of them today. It might be referring to the fact of living in a particular place. An example of this: an Eritrean citizen was given permanent residency in Israel for his efforts on October 7th. So I know it's a long sentence in some ways, but maybe without a lot of detail, but I was reading about someone who did something quite heroic to save others' lives. And so now, right, this person has been sort of granted official permission to live in this particular place. A second way the noun residency gets used is to describe a residential post that's held by many times a writer, a musician, or some type of artist. It's usually connected to a college or university, and there's going to be some kind of teaching part or teaching component to it. An example of this: the orchestra residency at the College of Music will return next month. So many times this this kind of special position, someone comes, stays for an extended period. Could be a week, maybe up to a month. And again, they many times when they're artists, they do some kind of performance or have some type of exhibition along with teaching students at the particular school. Now, a third way you hear the noun residency used is to refer to that period of medical training that one does after finishing medical school. This period of time can vary a lot by country. I think in the United States, it's pretty common to hear from like years 3 to 7, somewhere in that range. One might have a medical residency. And my example sentence here says, her medical residency will last 4 years. Sometimes it depends on the type of medicine that you want to practice. There are certain areas that are just going to require significantly more training before one can work independently. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.